Before we begin, pause for a moment. Just pause. Take a slow breath in and let it out. Now think about this question and don't answer it quickly. How much of your life is quietly controlled by money? Not the obvious parts. Not the bills, not the rent, not the groceries. I'm talking about the hidden parts. The job you tolerate but don't love. The dreams you postponed. The risks you didn't take. The silence you kept because you couldn't afford to lose stability. Most people don't realize this, but money isn't just something we use. Money is something that uses us. It shapes our fear. It shapes our confidence. It shapes who we feel allowed to become. And the scariest part is this. Most people think they understand money, when in reality, they've been taught just enough to stay dependent on it. That is why this book matters. That is why The Simple Path to Wealth is not really a book about investing. It's a book about freedom, about removing fear, about reclaiming control over your own life. Today, money feels more confusing than ever. Markets go up and down. Experts contradict each other. Social media shows overnight millionaires and silent bankruptcies in the same feed. People feel overwhelmed. They feel late. They feel behind. They feel like they missed some secret rulebook everyone else got. And into that chaos steps a calm, steady voice that says something radical in its simplicity. You don't need to be smart. You don't need to predict the market. You don't need complicated strategies. You just need to understand a few core truths and have the courage to follow them. This book matters today because modern life is expensive, noisy, and fragile. Jobs are less secure. Debt is normalized. Stress is constant. And yet, we're told to consume more, work harder, and somehow feel grateful. But what if the goal isn't more money? What if the goal is less dependence on money? That question alone changes everything. Pause for a moment and feel that. Less dependence, less fear, less pressure. That's the promise of this book. And here's the twist that makes it powerful. The ideas inside are not flashy. They're not exciting. They're not designed to impress anyone at a dinner party. They are designed to work. They are designed for regular people. People with families. People with jobs. People who want peace more than status. Most people misunderstand money because they think it's about math. It's not. Money is emotional. Money is psychological. Money is deeply tied to our sense of worth, safety, and identity. We are taught from a young age that money equals success. That earning more means becoming more. That struggling financially means failing as a person. This book quietly dismantles those lies. It doesn't shout. It doesn't shame. It doesn't scare. It simply shows you a path. A simple one. And simplicity, in a world addicted to complexity, is revolutionary. By the end of this journey, you won't just see money differently. You'll see your time differently, your job differently, your fears differently, and maybe your future differently. So stay with me. Slow down. Let this be a long conversation, not a lecture. Because this path isn't about getting rich quickly. It's about getting free permanently. To understand why this book feels so honest, we need to understand the person behind it. J.L. Collins didn't start as a financial guru. He didn't build this book to sell courses or flex success. This book began as a series of letters. Letters written by a father to his daughter. Think about that for a moment. Not advice shouted into the internet. Not marketing copy. But quiet, thoughtful guidance meant for someone he loved deeply. He wanted his daughter to understand money in a way that would protect her. Not just financially, but emotionally. He had seen what money confusion does to people. How it traps them in jobs they hate. How it turns life into a countdown to retirement that may never feel safe. Collins himself walked a path many people recognize. He worked. He saved. He invested. He made mistakes. He watched bubbles inflate and burst. Over time, patterns became obvious to him. Most people were not failing because they were lazy or stupid. They were failing because the system was confusing by design. Financial media thrives on fear, on urgency, on the illusion that you must constantly act or you'll miss out. Collins stepped back and asked a different question. What if doing less is actually better? What if simplicity isn't naive, but wise? The social context matters here. For decades, people were told that pensions would take care of them. Then pensions disappeared. People were told housing always goes up. Then crashes wiped out generations of savings. People were told experts knew best. Then experts failed publicly, repeatedly. This created a deep psychological wound around money. People stopped trusting themselves. They outsourced responsibility. They became passive participants in their own financial lives. This book addresses that wound. At its core, the problem is not lack of information. We are drowning in information. The problem is lack of clarity. Too many choices create paralysis. Too many voices create doubt. Too many strategies create anxiety. Collins noticed something simple but profound. The wealthiest people he knew were often the calmest. Not because they chased returns, but because they avoided ruin. They didn't try to win big. They tried not to lose. That mindset shift is everything. This book was written during a time when consumerism was celebrated and debt was encouraged. Credit cards were framed as tools of freedom, student loans as investments, mortgages as rites of passage. But beneath the surface, stress was rising. Burnout was rising. Dependence was rising. Collins saw money not as a scorecard, but as a tool to buy freedom. Freedom of time, freedom of choice, freedom from fear. And that's the real problem this book addresses. Not how to get rich, but how to stop being trapped. Think about how many decisions you make based on money anxiety. Staying silent. Saying yes when you want to say no. Delaying rest. Postponing joy. This book gently asks, what if it didn't have to be this way? Now we begin the heart of the journey. Collins starts with a deceptively simple truth. You must understand what money actually is. Money is stored energy. It represents hours of your life. Your attention, your effort, your creativity. When you spend money carelessly, you're not just spending cash. You're spending pieces of your life. Pause for a moment and feel that. Every dollar spent is a trade. Life energy exchanged for something. This realization alone changes behavior. Most people are not poor because they don't earn enough. They are poor because they spend without awareness. Lifestyle inflation is the silent thief. As income rises, spending rises faster. New car, bigger house, better phone, more subscriptions. And suddenly, despite earning more than ever, freedom feels further away. Collins doesn't shame this. He explains it. Humans adapt quickly. What once felt luxurious becomes normal, and normal soon feels insufficient. The solution isn't deprivation. It's intentionality. Spend on what brings genuine value. Ignore the rest. This leads to the idea of fuck you money. Not money for arrogance. Money for dignity. Money that gives you the ability to walk away from toxic situations. To say no without panic. To breathe. This is where money becomes power. Not power over others, but power over your own life. He then tackles debt. Not with judgment. With clarity. Debt is borrowing from your future self. And your future self may not agree to the terms. High-interest debt is especially dangerous. It compounds in the wrong direction. Instead of money working for you, you work for money. Debt narrows options. It reduces flexibility. It amplifies fear. Freedom cannot coexist with heavy debt. This isn't moral. It's mathematical. Then comes the concept of saving. Saving is not about being cheap. It's about building margin. Margin means safety. Margin means resilience. When life throws surprises, and it always does, margin turns crises into inconveniences. Collins emphasizes that saving is not what remains after spending. Saving is what happens before spending. Pay yourself first. This isn't a trick. It's a boundary. You decide in advance what your future deserves. Now the conversation turns to investing. And this is where many people tense up. But Collins does something rare. He slows down. He explains markets as reflections of human behavior. Fear, greed, hope, panic. Markets rise because humanity creates value over time. Innovation, productivity, progress. Short-term movements are noise. Long-term trends are growth. Trying to predict the market is like trying to predict weather years in advance. Experts fail consistently. The solution is humility. Accept that you don't know the future and invest accordingly. This leads to the idea of index funds. Instead of trying to pick winners, you own the entire market. You bet on humanity itself. This is not exciting. It is effective. Index funds remove ego from investing. They remove guesswork. They remove stress. You don't need to be right. You just need to be consistent. Time becomes your ally. Compounding does the heavy lifting. Quietly, relentlessly. Collins explains compounding not as magic, but as inevitability. Small actions repeated over long periods create outsized results. Most people underestimate this because they think linearly. Life rewards exponential thinking. The hardest part is patience. Doing nothing feels wrong, but often, doing nothing is the smartest move. The market rewards discipline. It punishes emotion. Fear makes people sell low. Greed makes them buy high. The investor who wins is often the one who interferes least. This is not about intelligence. It's about temperament. Let's return to where the journey was getting really deep, because this section is where many people quietly change the way they see their entire future. Up until now, we've talked about saving, about investing simply, about avoiding debt, about letting compounding do its work. But here, G.L. Collins slows the conversation down even more and asks something far more important than, how do I make money? He asks, what is money for? Pause for a moment. Because most people never ask that question. They chase numbers. They chase milestones. They chase comparisons. But they don't define the purpose. And without purpose, money becomes a never-ending treadmill. Collins introduces the idea that financial independence is not about stopping work. It's about removing fear from work. That distinction matters more than it seems. When you need a job, it owns you. When you choose a job, you own your time. Financial independence is the moment when your investments can cover your basic living expenses. Not luxury, not extravagance, just life, food, shelter, healthcare, simple joy. At that point, everything changes internally, even if nothing changes externally. You might still go to the same office. You might still do the same tasks. But psychologically, you're free. And psychological freedom is often more powerful than financial freedom itself. Because now, fear loses its grip. Fear of layoffs. Fear of speaking up. Fear of change. You're no longer cornered. This is why Collins keeps repeating the idea of enough. Enough is a radical concept in a culture built on more. Enough means you stop moving the finish line. Enough means you don't let other people define success for you. Enough means you reclaim your attention. Most people believe that reaching enough will feel empty. But the opposite is true. Reaching enough feels grounding, stabilizing, peaceful, because now your energy can move outward again, into relationships, into creativity, into health, into meaning. Collins also spends time here explaining why volatility is not your enemy. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings in investing. When markets fall, people panic because they think something is wrong. But markets falling is not a bug. It's a feature. Volatility is the price of admission for growth. If markets never dropped, there would be no reward for patience. The danger is not fluctuation. The danger is reacting emotionally to fluctuation. This is why Collins emphasizes having a plan before fear arrives. Because fear always arrives. In 2000, in 2008, in 2020, and again, and again, and again. The people who succeed are not the ones who predict crashes. They're the ones who endure them. Endurance beats brilliance. This is where the book quietly teaches emotional regulation. You don't fight fear by pretending it doesn't exist. You fight fear by designing systems that don't require you to act when fear is loud. Automatic investing, broad diversification, long-term thinking. These remove decision-making from moments of panic. Think about how powerful that is. You're not relying on willpower. You're relying on structure. Most failures with money are not intellectual failures. They're emotional ones. People know what they should do. They just can't do it consistently. So Collins builds a path where consistency is easier than sabotage. He also addresses a painful truth. Many people believe they're bad with money. But money doesn't require talent. It requires behavior. And behavior can be changed. Slowly, gently, without self-hate. This is why the path is boring. Boring is sustainable. Excitement burns out. Boredom compounds. Now let's talk about identity, because this is a layer most financial books never touch. People often tie their self-worth to their income, to their job title, to their perceived success. When markets drop or careers stall, It feels like a personal failure. Collins separates identity from net worth. You are not your portfolio. You are not your salary. You are not your productivity. Money is a tool you use, not a measure of who you are. This separation is crucial for long-term peace. Because markets fluctuate, careers evolve, life changes. If your identity is attached to numbers, you will suffer unnecessarily. But if your identity is rooted in values, money becomes flexible. Then Collins brings the listener face to face with a difficult but liberating truth. Nobody is coming to save you. Not employers, not governments, not experts on TV. And this is not said to scare you. It's said to empower you. Because the moment you accept responsibility, you gain control. Responsibility is not blame. It's ownership. Ownership over your decisions. Ownership over your future. And with ownership comes agency. You stop waiting. You stop hoping. You start acting. Quietly. Consistently. Without drama. This is where many listeners feel a subtle shift. Money stops feeling mysterious. The future stops feeling overwhelming. Not because everything is guaranteed, but because you finally understand the game you're playing. And understanding changes everything. Take another pause here. Let this sink in. You don't need to outsmart anyone. You don't need perfect timing. You don't need constant action. You need clarity. You need patience. You need trust in a simple process. That's the heart of this section. And from here, the book moves toward deeper reflections on freedom, purpose, and what it really means to live well, not just retire early. If you want me to continue seamlessly into the next section, just say, let's continue, because this section is where the book stops feeling like a financial guide and starts feeling like a quiet philosophy for living. By now, you may notice something subtle happening inside you. The anxiety that usually surrounds money starts to soften. Not because everything is solved, but because things are finally understandable. This is where J.L. Collins goes deeper into the emotional and psychological layers that most people never connect to money. He begins addressing a truth that many people avoid. Money amplifies who you already are. If you are anxious, money amplifies anxiety. If you are insecure, money amplifies insecurity. If you are calm, money amplifies calm. This is why simply earning more rarely fixes anything. People imagine that once they hit a certain number, peace will arrive automatically. But peace doesn't come from numbers. It comes from clarity and alignment. Collins talks about how people often chase financial independence thinking it will magically solve their unhappiness. And while freedom helps, it doesn't replace meaning. Money can remove constraints, but it cannot give direction. This is an important pause point. Think about how many people you've seen who are financially successful but emotionally exhausted, or wealthy but restless, or rich but deeply unhappy. The book gently reminds us that money is a tool, not a purpose. If you don't know what you're freeing yourself for, freedom can feel empty. That's why Collins encourages a values-first mindset. Not loudly, not with slogans, but with quiet consistency. When you know what matters to you, money decisions become easier. You stop optimizing for appearance and start optimizing for peace. Another powerful idea in this section is the concept of resilience. Most people think resilience comes from strength or intelligence. Collins reframes it. Resilience comes from margin. Margin in your finances. Margin in your schedule. Margin in your energy. When you live at the edge of your capacity, everything feels threatening. A small expense becomes a crisis. A small setback becomes panic. But when you build margin, life softens. A broken appliance becomes an inconvenience, not a disaster. A job change becomes a choice, not a threat. A market downturn becomes a temporary event, not a catastrophe. Margin gives you emotional state. This is why the book emphasizes low expenses just as much as high savings. You don't need extreme frugality. You need breathing room. And breathing room changes how you experience life. Collins also addresses one of the most dangerous myths around money, that complexity equals sophistication. Wall Street loves complexity because complexity creates dependence. The more confusing something feels, the more likely people are to hand control to someone else. But complexity hides fees. Complexity hides risk. Complexity hides incentives. Simplicity, on the other hand, exposes truth. Simple systems are easier to understand, easier to maintain, and harder to manipulate. This is why Collins repeatedly returns to the same ideas. Not because he lacks creativity, but because repetition builds confidence. Confidence comes from familiarity, and familiarity removes fear. He also talks about common money mistakes people continue making even when they know better. Chasing hot investments, reacting to headlines, comparing progress to others, constantly tweaking strategies. These behaviors come from insecurity, not logic. When you trust your plan, you don't need constant validation. Another layer here is patience with yourself. Many people feel late. Late to investing, late to saving, late to understanding. Collins dismantles this shame gently. There is no perfect starting point. There is only now. Compounding works from wherever you begin. The market does not care about your age, your past mistakes, or your regrets. It only responds to consistency over time. This realization alone can lift a massive emotional burden. Then comes a deeply human observation. Most people don't fail financially because of one big mistake. They fail because of 1,000 small emotional reactions. Fear-driven decisions, impulse spending, avoidance. The simple path reduces decision fatigue. You automate what matters. You ignore what doesn't. This frees mental space for living. Now Collins touches on something rarely discussed openly. Money affects relationships. Financial stress strains marriages. Debt creates power imbalances. Different money values cause conflict. By simplifying money, you reduce friction in relationships. When expectations are clear and goals are shared, money becomes less emotional. It stops being a weapon. It stops being a secret. It stops being a source of shame. Instead, it becomes a shared tool. And that brings us to one of the most important emotional shifts in the book. You stop seeing money as something you must constantly defend. You stop worrying about being judged. You stop proving anything. Your choices become quieter. And quiet choices are often the strongest ones. At this point in the journey, many people realize something surprising. They don't actually want luxury. They want security. They don't want excess. They want freedom from worry. They don't want to win. They want peace. This realization changes everything. Because peace is affordable. Not instantly. Not effortlessly. But realistically. As we approach the final stretch of the book, the tone becomes reflective. Less instruction. More wisdom. Collins is no longer teaching you what to do. He's showing you how to be. Calm in a noisy world. Patient in an urgent culture. Grounded in a system that thrives on instability. This is where the simple path stops feeling like a financial strategy and starts feeling like a personal philosophy. A philosophy that says, you don't need to chase. You don't need to impress. You don't need to panic. You need to choose deliberately. And that choice, made repeatedly over time, quietly changes your life. If you'd like me to continue into the final reflective conclusion and closing lessons, just say. As the journey continues, Collins addresses risk. Risk is not volatility. Risk is permanent loss. A portfolio that swings but recovers is not dangerous. A portfolio that collapses and never returns is. Diversification protects against ignorance. Indexing protects against arrogance. Then comes the concept of financial independence. Not retirement in the traditional sense, but the ability to live on your terms. Financial independence means work becomes optional, not because you're lazy, but because you're free. This changes how you show up. You work because you want to, not because you must. Relationships improve. Health improves. Life expands. Money becomes a servant again, not a master. Collins reminds us that the goal is not endless accumulation. It's enough. Knowing what enough means is one of the most powerful skills a person can develop. Without it, no amount is sufficient. With it, peace is possible. Let's slow everything down again. If you've stayed with this narration until now, it means something inside you is already shifting. Not dramatically, not loudly, but quietly. And quiet shifts are usually the ones that last. So pause for a moment and ask yourself honestly, how much of my life have I already traded for money without realizing it? Think about the mornings you woke up tired but still pushed yourself out of bed. Think about the evenings where your body was home, but your mind was still at work. Think about the weekends that felt too short, The vacations that never fully relaxed you, the constant low-level anxiety about, what if something goes wrong? Most people believe this is normal, that this is adulthood, that this is responsibility. But J.L. Collins gently shows us something uncomfortable. Much of this stress isn't inevitable. It's optional, not easy to remove, but possible. The deepest lesson of the simple path to wealth isn't about index funds or savings rates. Those are tools. Important tools, yes, but still just tools. The real lesson is this. Money is supposed to support your life, not consume it. Somewhere along the way, many of us inverted that relationship. We built lives that require constant income, constant effort, constant vigilance. And then we wonder why rest feels impossible. Collins invites us to imagine a different foundation. A foundation where your expenses are low enough that life feels breathable. Where your investments are boring enough that sleep comes easily. Where your future is not dependent on perfect timing or perfect decisions. This is not a fantasy. It's a design choice. And design requires intention. Think about how revolutionary that is. Not hustling harder. Not chasing more. Not proving anything. Just choosing deliberately. There's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing your survival does not depend on tomorrow's paycheck. Even if you still choose to work. Even if you enjoy what you do. That confidence changes how you speak. How you negotiate. How you set boundaries. It changes how much nonsense you tolerate. That's why Collins talks about financial independence as emotional independence. When money no longer terrifies you, fewer things can control you. You stop staying silent just to keep peace. You stop accepting disrespect because you need the job. You stop postponing your life until some imaginary future. Instead, life begins to feel wider. Now let's talk about something Collins never says directly, but it's woven through every page. Time is the real currency. Money is just a storage mechanism. And most people trade time without knowing its value. They assume they'll have more later. More energy. More health. More clarity. But later is never guaranteed. What is guaranteed is that time passes. The simple path to wealth is really about reclaiming time before it's gone. Not by escaping work completely, but by escaping desperation. There is dignity in choosing work. There is exhaustion in being trapped by it. This book gently pulls you from one to the other. Another subtle lesson, and this one matters deeply, is forgiveness. Forgiveness of yourself. Many people approach money carrying shame. Shame about past mistakes. Shame about debt. Shame about not knowing what they should have known. Collins does not shame. He assumes you're intelligent. He assumes you're capable. He assumes you're human. Mistakes are part of learning. The only real failure is refusing to learn at all. This is why the path is simple. Complex systems punish mistakes harshly. Simple systems absorb them. Simplicity is not weakness. It's resilience. Now think about the emotional weight this removes. No constant monitoring. No daily stress about market moves. No obsession with news headlines. You build a system that works quietly in the background while you live. And that brings us to the final realization. Wealth is not about impressing others. It's about not needing to. The moment you stop trying to signal success, real success becomes possible. You don't need the newest car. You don't need the biggest house. You don't need external validation. You need safety. You need autonomy. You need peace. And peace comes from alignment. Alignment between what you earn, what you spend, and what you value. When those three are aligned, life simplifies. Decisions become easier. Regret becomes quieter. The future becomes less frightening. J.L. Collins never promises that markets won't crash. He never promises that life won't surprise you. What he promises, implicitly, is that you will be prepared. Prepared not just financially, but emotionally. Prepared to endure downturns without panic. Prepared to face uncertainty without paralysis. Prepared to live without constantly looking over your shoulder. And that preparation is freedom. So as we come to the end of this long conversation, let me ask you something gently. What would change in your life if money stopped being your biggest fear? Would you breathe differently? Would you speak differently? Would you choose differently? You don't have to answer right now. Just let the question sit with you. Because the simple path to wealth doesn't demand urgency. It rewards patience. It doesn't require perfection. It requires consistency. And it doesn't ask you to become someone else. It asks you to become intentional. If this narration gave you clarity, give yourself credit for listening this deeply. Reflection is rare, and rare things are valuable. If you found meaning here, like this video so more people can find it. Subscribe if you want more long, thoughtful conversations like this. And share it with someone who feels trapped but doesn't yet know why. Most importantly, don't rush. Freedom is not a sprint. It's a quiet, steady walk on a simple path toward a life that finally feels like your own.